Welcome back. Now it's time for us to go to the forest. We're going to be doing the tree line block. We're going to be making 3 trees, which is the braid technique. We're going to be doing 2 that measure 8 inches finished, and then you'll do 1 that measures 7.5 inch finished. But it's all the same technique. It's all a matter of cutting it down at the end. In the instructions, it gives you 2 different ways in which you can cut the pieces for this block. If you happen to have a braid ruler, then you can use that. But if you're like me and you don't own a braid ruler, you can use the template that they give you in the pattern. I just simply took this to my printer, printed it on a piece of cardstock so it has a little bit of weight to it, and then cut it out. You're going to start out by cutting your 1.5 inch strips. Then on one end, I'm simply going to square it off so that I have a nice 90 degree. Now I can take my template, I line that up, and then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it up with that edge. Now I can slip this out of the way and I can cut it, and now I have one piece. So now when I slide this down, I simply rotate it, line this up here, again, line up my ruler here, move my template, and cut it. And it's just a matter of going down your pieces. If you get really brave, you can stack them. Now you'll notice my pieces that I have cut here, they're not exactly all green. And that's because I'm using scraps. And that's what I would recommend that you do in order to learn this technique, that you just use random scraps from your stash. Because the first time I did my block, my tree looked like it had been in a windstorm and it was leaning. Because I used my real fabric, I had to sit down and take it all apart and start over. Whereas if I had practiced using scraps, then I could have learned, thrown it away, and then used my real fabric. So let's get started. The first thing you need to do is you need to make the trunk for your tree. We're going to be doing one that measures 8.5 inches, 8 inches finished. So we're going to need our outside pieces that measure 3.5 inches, and then we need our trunk, which is 2.5 inches. So I simply just sewed the 3 strips together and pressed towards the darker fabric. Now we're ready to mark this piece to start our braid. So I'm going to fold this in half, lining up my seams, and just kind of finger press, because what we're doing is we want to find the center of this piece. So now that I have this, I can take my pen and I can mark my center point. Remember that white pen, it's going to appear shortly. Now I'm going to take my braid. Remember, we're working with batik, so there's no right and wrong side. If you're working with other fabrics, you want to place the right side down of your fabric. You want to, I'm going to line this up with my ruler, and I want to place this so that that point lines up with my center, and then I want this piece to be perfectly horizontal. When you do that, this will be a 45-degree angle. I'm going to go through, and I'm just going to put a couple of pins in to keep things from slipping. And then I will take this to my sewing machine, and I am going to sew 1/4 inch. now I can take this to the ironing board and I can press that back. And I just give it a quick press. For a moment, I'm just going to pull this forward because I want to get rid of this extra bulk. And so I'm just going to line up my ruler here and I'm going to take off the excess. Now I'm going to take my second piece and I'm going to put it on the other side. I'm going to line this up, and you want to make sure that this part is perfectly horizontal. Again, I'm going to take my pins and I'm just going to pin it. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch. So now, this time before I iron it, I'm going to trim the excess off, and then I will go back. And so now I have the beginning of my tree. So you're just going to keep working from left side to right side and continue. So now this piece, I can just line this up, making sure that it lines up here and here. Put my pins in and then sew a 1/4 inch. Now I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch seam. Then I'm just going to remove my pins. And give it just a quick press. Now we're just going to continue doing this until this point up at the top. You always want to end with your right side. And you'll continue going until this point is higher than 24.5 inches. We'll cut it down afterwards, but you want to make sure that it is higher. So now I'm just going to continue putting pieces on. Okay, so now we're going to pretend that this is now 24 inches high. Actually, what you're going to do is you're going to do 12 sets. You always want to end with this side, with your right side. So what we're going to do now that we have it finished is we're going to go through and we're going to trim this down so that it lines up with our base. And this one measures 8 inches. So once I have this done, then I'm going to measure from here to here, and I want it to measure 24.5 inches. So we're just pretending that this is 24.5 inches. I'm just going to line up my ruler and I'm going to top my tree. Now we have to fill in the background for these corners. So you have 2 squares. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your square, and let me get my sandboard so that my square doesn't move. And I'm going to mark the diagonal on each of these squares. And of course, if you're doing one of these without batiks, your line goes on the back of your fabric. So now I have both of my squares marked. Now it's time to attach it to the top of the tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to put right sides together. And I'm going to line this up with this edge and with the top edge. I'll stick a pin in, and again, I'm doing them parallel to the line so that they're out of the way. There's nothing really on that side that I can pin to. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew on this line. Now remember, if you err on sewing on this line, err to this side, not that side. Because if you cut into this side of it, then when you fold your square back, it won't cover the area that you need it to. And I'm going to go and sew down on that line. Now that I'm happy with where I've sewn it, I'm just going to take this piece and it gets folded back. Before we iron it, I'm going to take my ruler and I am going to cut 1/4 inch away from that seam. And so I just cut this little bit of excess off. And then I come to the iron and press it back. Now it's time to do the other side. I'm going to take my other square and I'm going to line it up, and you notice that the points do overlap. Now I'm going to sew my line. Remember, if you err to this side. And then I will go and cut this excess off. And then just give it a quick press. When you're done, you should have 1/4 inch from the top of this point to the outside of your fabric. So then your tree will be done. Remember, 2 of them are going to measure 8.5 inches by 24.5 inches, and 1 will measure 7.5 inches by 24.5 inches. Now in your pattern, it tells you which fabrics to cut. So you will have a certain number of each of the different colors. But if you remember at the beginning, I told you on the greens, save your extra fabric. And this is where you might want to use it, because you might want a little more of one other color than what you had. There is no exact pattern for what order these colors need to go. So what I would suggest is you just simply sit down, lay it out. When you get a pattern that you like, then you start sewing. And you want to make sure that each of your trees are different, that you're not using the same pattern each time, because no 2 trees are the same. They are all unique.